There are three classifications of joints based upon the amount of movement available. The first classification is a fixed joint. An example of a fixed joint is the cranium. The cranium's main purpose is to protect the brain. The next classification are slightly movable joints. An example of this is the vertebrae. The vertebrae allows movement. The last classification of joints are synovial joints. An example of this is the knee. There are 6 types of synovial joints. The first one is a saddle joint. A saddle joint is called this because there's one bone shaped like a saddle and one sits on top like a jockey. A saddle joint has more flexibility than a hinge or gliding joint. An example of a saddle joint is the thumb. The next type is a pivot joint. This is where one bone rotates within the collar of another. An example of this is the neck, which allows the head to turn either side. Another type are gliding joints. This is where the bones meet at flat or nearly flat surfaces and allows the bones to glide over one another in any direction. An example of this are the fingers. The next type of joint is a hinge joint, which is formed between 2 or more bones. Hinge joints can only flex or extend along one axis. An example of this is the knee. There is also a ball and socket joint. This is where the spherical end of a bone lies in a socket. An example of this is the shoulder. The last type of joint is a condyloid joint. This allows movement across 2 planes. An example of this is the wrist. Here is a knee joint. There are several structures in a knee joint, all with a different function. First, we have the joint capsule. This protects and holds the joint in place. There are also ligaments here which connect bone to bone. There is cartilage between the bones, which acts as a buffer so they don't grind against one another. There is also a synovial membrane, which function is to hold in synovial fluid. The synovial fluid's function is to lubricate the joint. There are 2 types of movement available at a hinge joint: flexion and extension. An example of this would be a bicep curl. This is an example of abduction and adduction at a ball and socket joint. Ball and socket joints can also do rotation, circumduction, flexion, and extension. This is an example of rotation at a ball and socket joint. A saddle joint can also do this movement. This is an example of circumduction at a ball and socket joint. This can also be done at a condyloid joint such as the wrist. This is an example of horizontal flexion and horizontal extension. This can be done at a ball and socket, condyloid, hinge, pivot, and saddle joint. This is plantar and dorsiflexion at the ankle joint. Plantar is facing down and dorsiflexion is facing up. This is pronation and supination at a condyloid joint. Supination is facing up and pronation is facing down.